Consistency is not a trait that some are born with and others are denied. It is not a gift, nor is it a matter of convenience or preference. It is a skill, a practice, a deliberate engagement with the friction of life. You don't become consistent by hoping you'll feel like doing the thing. You don't become consistent by waiting for motivation to show up, because motivation is a fleeting chemical signal, unreliable, transient, and far too easily manipulated by your environment. If you wait for motivation to move, you'll wait forever. But if you train yourself to move despite the absence of motivation, now you're building something real. When you force yourself to be consistent, what you are really doing is building a relationship between your present self and your future self. Most people live in a negotiation between the two. The present self wants comfort, ease, dopamine now. The future self wants health, success, peace, longevity. And unless you impose order on this dynamic, the present self will almost always win, because it is louder, more impulsive, and chemically reinforced. But here's the truth. The more you listen to the present self's demands for indulgence, the more you weaken your future self. And the weaker your future self becomes, the less capable you are of handling life's inevitable challenges. Forcing yourself to be consistent is not about becoming robotic. It is about mastering the systems in your body that regulate behavior. Dopaminergic pathways, neural circuits, circadian timing, and stress responses, and using them to align your actions with your goals. When you understand the way your brain responds to effort, reward, and delay, you gain leverage. You stop being the victim of internal conflict and start being the architect of your own behavior. Let's start with the simple fact that the brain rewards novelty. It releases dopamine when you experience something new, exciting, or unexpected. That's why it's so easy to start a new habit, but so hard to maintain it. The novelty fades, the dopamine drops, and suddenly what was once exhilarating becomes mundane. This is the death of consistency. But here's the key. You can train your brain to derive dopamine from the act of consistency itself, not from the outcome, not from the reward, but from the repetition. This is neuroplasticity in action. When you reinforce the pathway that says, I show up no matter what, that pathway becomes stronger, more accessible, more automatic. You become the kind of person who does the thing regardless of how you feel. That's where the power lies, not in how much you do on a good day, but in how reliably you do what needs to be done on the hard days. Anyone can work out when they're motivated. Anyone can study when it's interesting. Anyone can write when the inspiration flows. But if you want to build something extraordinary, if you want to make real change in your life, it's what you do when you don't feel like it that matters. That's the test. And that's why you must force yourself to be consistent. Let's talk physiology for a moment. Your nervous system is tuned to respond to stress. When you anticipate effort, especially effort without immediate reward, your brain registers that as a threat. It activates the stress response. Heart rate increases, cortisol levels rise. You feel a pull to avoid. But avoidance is a short-term strategy that erodes long-term capacity. Every time you skip the thing you said you'd do, your brain records it. It encodes inconsistency. It creates a loop of failure that becomes self-reinforcing. But here's the critical insight. You can rewire that system. You can reframe effort as a trigger for reward. You can teach your brain to associate the pain of discipline with the pleasure of growth. This requires deliberate practice. It means choosing to engage the difficult task before you're ready. It means linking small wins to the identity you want to create. And it means doing this over and over again until your neural circuitry reflects it. This is not easy. It is not glamorous, but it is the foundation of every meaningful achievement. The problem is most people confuse excitement for commitment. They confuse a rush of intention with a system of action. Excitement fades. Commitment is boring. It is repetitive. It's the same meal prep, the same wake-up time, the same uncomfortable conversation, the same stretch of silence before the words come, the same walk, the same set, the same grind. And if you're waiting for that to feel exciting, you'll quit. But if you force yourself through the boredom, if you force yourself to stay with it when your brain screams for something easier, that's when something changes. You have to be willing to tolerate the psychological friction that comes with doing the hard thing over and over again. That friction is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're on the edge of growth. Neurobiologically, every time you override an impulse to quit, you strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, focus, and willpower. You are literally reshaping your brain when you force yourself to be consistent. You are becoming someone new, but it requires you to be deliberate, to create constraints, to engineer your environment, to remove the friction from starting and increase the friction from quitting. If your phone is the source of distraction, move it. If your environment cues laziness, change it. If the people around you make inconsistency normal, find new people. You cannot afford to normalize failure, not when the stakes are your life, your health, your mission. Every day you reinforce a behavior, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. You are not just acting, you are sculpting your identity. And here's something most people miss. Consistency is not about perfect performance. It's about relentless return. You will miss, you will fail, you will oversleep, overeat, underperform. That's life. The key is what happens next. Do you spiral into shame and wait for the next wave of motivation? Or do you reset and resume immediately? That gap, the time between a miss and your next execution, is the measure of your discipline. Shrink that gap. Don't let one mistake become two. Don't let a bad morning become a wasted day. Don't let a skipped session become the end of a streak. Train yourself to come back fast. That's consistency. You also have to be strategic. Not all efforts are created equal. Some behaviors move the needle more than others. Identify those, build rituals around them, attach them to triggers in your environment, make them non-negotiable. Don't leave your most important actions to chance. Build them into the architecture of your day. Set alarms, use timers, prepare the night before, make it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong one. That's not weakness. That's intelligent design. Willpower is finite. Systems are sustainable. And yes, there will be resistance, emotional resistance, physical resistance, environmental resistance. Your brain will invent reasons to delay, justify, excuse. You will feel tired, overwhelmed, confused, but those feelings are not facts. They are temporary states, not permanent truths. You don't need to feel ready to act. You need to act in spite of your feelings. You need to reclaim authority over your body and mind, and that happens through repetition. The more often you show up, the less decision-making is required. You reduce cognitive load. You create momentum. Momentum is a biological state, accelerated action reinforced by dopamine and norepinephrine, but it only emerges after action. If you wait to feel it before starting, you'll stay stuck. So move, begin, force the system to activate. The first few minutes will be hard, then easier, then automatic. This is not theoretical. This is grounded in neuroscience. Your behaviors wire your brain, and your brain wired correctly can carry you through resistance without internal negotiation. But you must build that wiring through consistent exposure to effort. Discipline is not a character trait. It's a neurochemical pattern. And like all patterns, it can be built, broken, and rebuilt. Every day you face the choice. Comfort now or capacity later. Short-term relief or long-term strength. You can't have both. The body adapts to what you demand of it. The mind sharpens in response to what you ask of it. And life rewards those who show up. Not those who feel like it, but those who do it anyway. Force yourself to be consistent, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because every act of consistency is a vote for your potential. Every repetition is a strike against chaos. Every small choice compounds. And over time, those choices define you. They shape your trajectory. They determine whether you live as a slave to circumstance or as the author of your own evolution. You don't need more time. You need more alignment. You don't need better feelings. You need better follow through. You don't need another plan. You need to execute the one you already have again and again and again. Not perfectly, just relentlessly. The ability to force yourself into consistency, even when the emotional and physical systems of your body are begging for rest or diversion, is among the most powerful forms of freedom available. Because with that freedom comes the power to decide, to take agency over your life instead of being steered by circumstances or conditioned responses. What's often misunderstood is that consistency is not a matter of superhuman willpower. It is a matter of systems layered onto biology. Your brain is always looking for patterns. When it sees that a certain action follows a certain cue repeatedly, it begins to anticipate and eventually automate that behavior. This is habit formation. It is neural efficiency. But it only kicks in after sufficient repetition. The discomfort of the beginning is the toll you must pay for automation later. You can't skip that toll. You have to pay it in attention, in discomfort, in repetition. The early stages of building consistency are often defined by failure. That's part of the process. Most people interpret those early misses as proof that they can't be consistent. But what they fail to realize is that those very misses are part of the rewiring. Your brain is learning what not to do. It's pruning away weak synaptic links while strengthening the ones that are reinforced by repeated behavior. That pruning and strengthening process is called strengthening plasticity. It means your brain isn't a fixed machine. It's an adaptive, flexible network shaped by your actions. So every time you get up early when you don't feel like it, every time you hit a workout, when you're tired, every time you choose water over soda, a page over a scroll, silence over distraction, you're literally shaping your brain into a more consistent version of you. The progress isn't always visible on the outside, but inside, in the cortex, in the limbic system, in the basal ganglia, there's a reorganization happening, a sculpting. And one day, the behavior that once took all your willpower will feel automatic, not because you changed who you are, but because you changed how your brain operates. The myth is that you need to believe in yourself before you take action. The reality is the belief often comes after the action. Confidence is not a prerequisite for consistency. It's a byproduct of it. You become someone who believes in themselves by repeatedly doing what needs to be done. You earn trust in yourself by honoring your word to yourself. That's the loop. Intention, action, reinforcement, not once, but thousands of times. There is no shortcut to that kind of internal stability. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of motivation as a fuel source, but motivation is like caffeine, short-lived, volatile, and often counterproductive in excess. What you need instead is discipline. And discipline is less about pushing yourself than it is about managing your conditions. If you want to be consistent, reduce the need to decide. Prepare the night before, set your clothes out, preload your schedule, remove access to temptations, increase visibility of your goals, anchor your new behaviors to existing ones. This is called habit stacking. And it works because it uses established neural pathways to scaffold new ones. You can also use the body to control the mind. Breathing patterns, posture, light exposure, and even eye movements affect the nervous system state. For example, deliberate deep breathing can reduce the stress response, increasing your likelihood of sticking with a difficult task. Early morning exposure to natural light aligns your circadian rhythm, which in turn affects mood, energy, and cognitive clarity, all of which impact your ability to act consistently. This is biology. You are not fighting your body when you build consistency, you are leveraging it. You must begin to see consistency as an internal contract, not something you perform for others, not something that depends on praise or visibility. It's an agreement between who you are and who you're becoming. And every day you skip out on that contract, you widen the gap between those two selves. But when you hold the line, when you meet your own standards, even when no one's watching, you collapse that gap. You become integrated, aligned. And that alignment is what gives rise to true power. The reality is, life will not wait for your convenience. You don't get to choose the perfect circumstances. You don't get to delay growth until the calendar clears or your mood stabilizes. If you want to become someone of value to yourself and to the world, you must show up under suboptimal conditions. You must build under stress. You must operate while uncertain, because those are the true testing grounds of consistency. Not when things are easy, but when your nervous system is flaring, when your resources are low, when no one would blame you for stopping, but you don't. And if you really want to reframe the struggle, start seeing difficulty as data. Every time you feel resistance to an action, that's information. It's a signal about where you're weakest, where you need reinforcement. When the gym feels unbearable, that's where growth lives. When the work feels monotonous, that's where mastery is built. When the silence before a task feels too loud, that's where your focus is forged. Use discomfort as a compass. Chase it, not because suffering is virtuous, but because it's often the signal that you're working on the right edge of your potential. Force yourself to build streaks. There's immense power in unbroken chains of effort. The human brain is reward-oriented, and visible streaks tap into that. Keep a calendar, track your sessions, cross off days, see your consistency. Visualize your identity being etched into that chain of unbroken action. Miss a day, start again. But build the habit of never missing twice. Let your floor be higher than most people's ceiling. If your worst day still includes your core behaviors, you've built something nearly unshakable. You must also learn to celebrate the act, not just the outcome. Most people only feel good when the results show, but results are lagging indicators. They come long after the action. If you can learn to associate satisfaction with the completion of the behavior itself, writing the page, making the call, finishing the workout, you'll create a much more sustainable system of reward. This builds intrinsic motivation, the kind that's not dependent on external praise or recognition. This also means guarding your self-talk. The narrative you run inside your head can either drive consistency or destroy it. If every misstep becomes a referendum on your worth, you'll crumble. If instead you interpret every slip as a single data point, adjust course, and recommit, you create resilience. The voice in your head must not be a critic. It must be a coach. Not a cheerleader, not an enabler, a coach. Honest, firm, supportive, demanding. Over time, you will realize that consistency is the great separator. Talent helps, resources help, but consistency compounds. It builds skill, reputation, reliability, and inner peace. It allows you to weather storms and come out stronger. It creates a kind of internal gravity. You begin to expect from yourself what once felt impossible. You begin to walk into challenges with calm instead of chaos. You become someone others can rely on. More importantly, you become someone you can rely on. It's not about how much you can do in a burst of intensity. It's about what you can do daily with discipline for years. That's the difference between a short-lived sprint and a meaningful legacy. And the only way to build that is to override your defaults. When your mind says stop, you say go. When your feelings say no, you say now. When the world says later, you say today. You want freedom? Force yourself into consistency. because that's the only kind of freedom worth having. The freedom to trust yourself, the freedom to show up, the freedom to execute again and again and again. Without applause, without permission, without delay. Do the thing. Then do it again. Then do it until it becomes who you are. And when it becomes who you are, you'll look back and realize something profound. It was never about the task itself. It was about what doing the task turned you into. Consistency isn't a habit. It's a transformation process. It peels away the layers of comfort, illusion, and excuse and reveals discipline, clarity, and character underneath. But it only reveals those things through repetition under pressure. Understand this, your nervous system, your physiology, your hormones, they all respond to patterns. And the pattern you create when you show up day after day, even in silence, even in struggle, is encoded into your biology. You're not just building behavior, you're rewiring the signal to noise ratio in your life. You're teaching your dopamine system to release reward for process, not outcome. You're carving neural tracks that say, we move forward regardless. And that becomes the internal compass by which you navigate not just goals, but life. When people quit, it's rarely because the goal became impossible. It's because the pain of inconsistency stacked up and became overwhelming. You start missing once, then twice, then a week goes by, and the friction of restarting feels too high. So you rationalize, you justify, you rebuild a narrative that protects your ego and shields your identity from the shame of having stopped. But if you'd kept going, if you'd simply forced yourself back into the repetition, you would have avoided the trap entirely. So avoid the trap. Stop making your performance conditional. Stop needing it to feel right or easy or fun. Instead, aim to be the kind of person who does the hard thing with no questions asked. Not because you like suffering, but because you like being free. Free from inconsistency, free from emotional dependency, free from regret. Every act of consistency builds not just progress, but self-respect. You trust people who do what they say, right? So why wouldn't you apply that same standard to yourself? The more often you become someone who honors their word, even to themselves, even in private, the more you stabilize your internal world. You stop looking outward for permission. You stop seeking constant reassurance. You become centered, anchored, and from that place, everything changes. This is not a motivational ideal. This is hardwired neurobehavioral training. Just like muscles grow from time under tension, your mind becomes resilient through consistency under friction. The friction doesn't mean you're broken. It means the growth signal is working. It means adaptation is underway. But if you pull away at the first sign of difficulty, you kill the signal. You abort the learning process. You choose familiarity over expansion. Don't do that. Force yourself to stay in the discomfort. Learn to sit with the urge to stop and do nothing with it. Let the resistance speak and choose anyway. That act of choosing anyway is not small. It is not symbolic. It is everything. That is the rep. That is the rep that builds the mental and physical circuits for real consistency. And it is repeatable. You can do it today and tomorrow and every day until it's not effort, it's identity. And this is where you transcend behavior and start shaping your entire worldview. Because once you are consistent with one thing, just one thing, you realize you can be consistent with anything. You prove to yourself that the narrative you had about being lazy, unmotivated, inconsistent, that story isn't real. It was just a story, and now you've replaced it with evidence. And evidence is the most powerful narrative of all. The world doesn't need more people who start things. It needs people who finish, people who continue, people who get up after a bad day and say, let's go again. That's who makes change. That's who builds greatness. Not the ones who did it once, but the ones who kept showing up long after it stopped being new. This is the kind of resilience that leaks into everything. When you force yourself to be consistent in one area, your training, your work, your studies, it starts bleeding into other parts of your life. You stop tolerating chaos. You stop indulging drama. You stop making excuses. You see through the noise. You find focus. You build order. And you do it without asking anyone else to hand it to you. That's power. That's autonomy. That's adulthood. It's not about intensity. Anyone can go hard for a day, but few can stay steady for a year. The magic is in the steadiness, the compound interest of effort, the way small choices accumulate into irreversible change. You want to lose weight? Be consistent with food and training for 180 days, no matter how you feel. You want to build a skill? Practice it every single day, even when it's boring, even when you hate it. You want a better relationship? Show up to it every day with attention and humility, not just when it's easy. The average person changes direction the second results lag behind effort. But the consistent person knows results always lag, so they keep going anyway. They don't need immediate reinforcement. They know progress lives in delay. They don't ask, is this working yet? They ask, am I working yet? Because they've learned that the system is the success, the routine is the victory, the act of showing up is the win. There will be days you do everything right and still feel stuck. Days when the work yields nothing obvious. Days when you're exhausted, uninspired, maybe even angry. Those are the days that matter most. That's where your threshold is tested. That's where growth occurs, not in the glamorous moments, but in the ones where no one would blame you for quitting, but you didn't. So build anchors, build rituals, build systems that catch you when motivation fails. Build a morning routine that starts your day before the world makes demands. Build evening systems that shut things down with precision. Build guardrails for your goals so you can't veer too far off course. Build checkpoints that hold you accountable even when no one else is watching. This is how consistency is manufactured. Not by luck, not by talent, but by deliberate, repeatable structure. And don't expect it to be perfect. Don't expect linear progress. You will mess up. You will slip. You will wake up late, miss workouts, blow deadlines, fall short. But consistency isn't broken by imperfection. It's broken by quitting. What matters is what you do after the miss. Do you recalibrate, or do you self-correct, or do you self-destruct? One is the path of maturity. The other is the path of mediocrity. Be ruthless about returning to the path. Every time you do, you strengthen the neural pathways that say, we don't quit. And over time, that wiring becomes instinct. You no longer debate whether to show up. You just show up because it's who you are now, because it would feel more unnatural to stop than to continue. That's the real shift, not when you complete the program or reach the goal, but when the action becomes the norm. When you don't have to think about doing the work, you just do it because the identity has been installed, because the habit has been embodied, because the neurons have been trained, and now you're dangerous. Now you can outlast people. Now you can outperform people, not because you're better, but because you're consistent. You don't burn bright, you burn steady. You don't sprint, you march. You don't fluctuate, you rise slowly, daily. And when people ask how you did it, you won't have a flashy answer, you won't have a secret or a trick. You'll just say, I forced myself to be consistent no matter what. And that will be the truth.